We have 3 springs which feed into a swamp on this side, which is sort of northeast, and then we have another swamp down on this side, which leads into Pope's Glen Creek, and we've got at least 1 spring and 2 ephemeral springs that feed into it. And my guess is that on the night of the 21st of December, the fire was very fierce behind Hat Hill Road, and but it didn't get up here until about 10:30 in the morning on the 22nd. And I think that it slowed down because of the swamps, because although the swamp water had receded, it was still wet underneath. There was still water there, and I think that slowed it down. So we were prepared, but we were actually quite shocked at how quickly it came up. And so we had our hoses at the ready, and we were ready to defend, and we had the pumps and all our tanks ready to go, and we had our fire gear on, but at the same time we had the car packed in case we needed to make a quick getaway. And it turned out that we did have to make a quick getaway because it came up too fast, and we called 000, and luckily the fire and rescue came pretty quickly and doused it all. And then, of course, the fire then continued along our boundary, which goes below all the houses on Clarence Road, and the RFS then came and put out the fire there. But at that stage, the backs of some of the houses had been burnt. There are a number of vegetation types here, but one big division is on either side of this ridge line, where you have the Eucalyptus oreades or Blue Mountain ash assemblage of vegetation types on the it's a southeast facing slope. They're a very, very special tree for the upper mountains. And on the other side you've got the peppermint gum assemblage, which then grades down to a swamp, an upland swamp, which then becomes actually a creek, which flows around to Pope's Glen Creek in the national park. So the important thing for us is to make sure that we feel like we're custodians of the bushland. We want to make sure that the bush, the creek and the bushland that goes into the national park is in a good condition. So, we're very, very keen to control any weeds that are on our land here, and also encourage any regrowth. And in certain areas we've done quite a lot of weed removal, and then we've planted, and I've learned this through observation, we've planted the pioneer plants, which go to restore the soil so that eventually the soil is healed, as it were, and is then suitable for growing the gum trees, the eucalypts. It's interesting to observe, and I've been doing quite a lot of this, sort of walking around and looking and observing what pioneer plants emerge after a fire and in which location, because it is different. Here, this ridge line is quite rocky and stony, and so the pioneer plants are these native grasses, largely the native grasses, not much else. By the way, there's quite a few gum tree seedlings coming up here too, which I was also quite surprised about, not just from the roots of the existing trees and the epicormic buds, but actual little gum trees. And I have been told to expect quite a few small gum trees coming up in the mountain ash area, because the mountain ash don't have epicormic buds. They only propagate themselves through seed. So I'm on the lookout for those. The other plant, of course, that comes up everywhere, even in this area and everywhere, is bracken, and that's another pioneer plant. It's a plant which is stimulated to germinate after major disturbance, such as bushfire. And its role in nature is to begin to restore the soil so that it's suitable for the next generation of native plants. So here the pioneer plant assembly is a little different. There's a few little rushes, there's much more bracken, there's a particular type of of grass which likes quite wet soils, like that funny little one there. And then what has emerged recently is like the beginnings of the next generation, which is the coral ferns. The Blechnum. Blechnum, that's also another pioneer plant. Selaginella, one too. Dichondra. And here's king ferns, Todia barbara. Now they burnt totally, but they've all come back. All our bushland is registered under a conservation agreement with the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust. So that's another good reason for us to continue to monitor and look after the bushland. This was a total weed plume. It was a impenetrable wall, 5 meters tall, of holly, privet, Himalayan honeysuckle, you name it. And of course the Pinus radiata is still there. So that's another big project to incrementally remove those and cut them down to be able to allow the soil to restore itself. Interestingly enough, in between all of that, there are tree ferns growing, and there's also calicoma, which is black wattle, and that's come back, and they're growing. So they seem to be able to tolerate the quite acid soil conditions of the Pinus radiata and those other introduced weed species. So we've done an enormous amount of clearing. We've cut down, we spent about 6 weeks cutting down all the holly which was reshooting and cutting it and painting it. And you'll see like little piles stacked here and there. And then in the clearer areas, which were already relatively weed-free, we took advantage of the fact that there were already pioneer plants coming up, and they were mainly acacias and Blechnum, the fern. So I planted more acacias, more Blechnum, some black wattle, the calicoma, and Garnia. Garnia is also coming back. So it's largely, all these little tube stocks are the pioneer plants. Here you've got the black wattle or Calicoma serratifolia regenerating from the base of an old burnt tree. After the fires, we then had a period of intense rain, and I was very concerned because all the ground was completely exposed and bare, and I was worried about erosion and also about sedimentation in the swamp. So we talked to council. In fact, I didn't even have to ring them. They just came and they put down all this weed matting and Hoya logs to stem that rush of water, which was like a cascade of water that came down, and it did the job. It's held everything back. It's held the soil together. So council got a grant from local land services to clear all the weeds and create this pools and ripples with boulders and rocks, rock armouring it's called, to slow down the flow of the water and to capture and retain a lot of the weeds, weed propagules, and generally street rubbish that ends up down here. We've put in an extra 2 tanks since the fire. We've put in another 22,700 litre tank, and that one is purely for firefighting purposes. This one next to it, that was used during the fires, and there's another smaller tank which is up next to the house, which is just capturing the rest of the roof space that we hadn't already captured. So the whole of the roof area and all the downpipes now feed into rainwater tanks. And we have another 22,700 litre tank up the top, and that one and this one, and there's a smaller one. They were both used for firefighting. And this one, what we plan to do is we plan to actually build a, it's not exactly a fire trail, but it'll be a bit of a fire break where we're wanting to put pipes which connect to this bottom tank, and then stand pipes all along up to probably almost to the end of our property, so that we can attach hoses to it for firefighting, because the fire came up from the gully and just right up here, and we're looking and thinking of different ways or better ways that we can protect the place for future fires, because there will be future fires. And that includes putting sprinklers on the roof of the buildings. The captain of the Blackheath Mount Victoria RFS suggested we might even put a sprinkler on the roof of the tanks, because the tanks are plastic, so that they don't melt.